International Conference on Arts and Humanities.
Hello everyone, my name is Seung-Won from Korea. My presentation is about the Butonese traditional elite group in Indonesia. And then the title is The Nature of Power and Responses Towards Social Changes. Briefly, I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk in the presentation. It's all about the rise and fall of the power of the traditional aristocratic class in Buton, Indonesia. And then in Buton, traditionally, there was a rigid social stratification, but this social stratification was a little bit different from the case of India, where the society was closely divided into kind of a couple of castes. So although the nature of the caste was different, but in Indonesia, there exists a certain concept of social stratification. And then this kind of concept of social stratification got through some kind of changes in the Dutch colonial period. But very surprisingly, this kind of conception re-emerged back in the 2000s, very contemporary period. So in my presentation, I'm going to trace back what was the reason for certain revival of this kind of social stratification in Buton area, and what's the political implication in Indonesian society. So first of all, I have to show off the map of the Buton Island. Buton Island is located in the southeastern part of Sulawesi Island in Indonesia. And then in Indonesia, this Buton Island is located as a marginalized kind of a place because not many people are familiar with this island, and then history is kind of unknown up to the present time. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the history of Kingdom of Buton, where this social stratification was originated from. And then the society was divided into 4 classes. So first one, So the elite group first came from Johor, currently Malaysia, in the 13th century. So previously, there were certain groups already, original people in Buton Island, but they didn't form into an elite group. But this immigrant group from Malaysia became the dominant political elite in the traditional Buton. And secondly, not from this first settlers, first elite group, but there was another immigrant group, perhaps from China. And then this first elite chose a queen from this Chinese immigrant group. So kind of forming the traditional elite is kind of very weird in case of Buton, because usually in most parts of the world, the leader came from the original population. But in case of Buton, the leaders came from immigrant group, and it was not from the first immigrant group, but from the second immigrant group. So this is kind of one of the unique characteristic of the Butonese leadership in traditional era. So first queen name was Wakaka, and then people say she was a queen, and then perhaps she was a princess of Kublai Khan because it was the 13th century, or the local legend says that she was born from the bamboo hair. So it's kind of a mysterious being. And then Wakaka married a prince from the Japanese kingdom, the famous kingdom of Majapahit during the time. Butonese kingdom remained as a Hindu-Buddhist influenced kingdom by the 16th century, and then in 1511, the Butonese kingdom adopted Islam. But this Islam, the characteristic was a little bit different from the original Islam from Arab, because it was the amalgam of the Sufistic tradition and the Islamic, Hinduism, and local animism. And then many people in Buton, when I interviewed, they said they believed in reincarnation, which was the concept of the Buddhism or Hinduism. although they are Muslim. And then Butonese kingdom, although it's not very well known, but it was one of the typical maritime kingdoms in Southeast Asia. Buton kingdom was facing the constant threat from the other kingdoms in the area. For example, the kingdom of Goa or Ternate. That's why the Butonese kingdom made a very early alliance with the Dutch East India Company because they had to confront the threat from the Goa kingdom or other kingdoms. In the 19th century, the Buton became the Dutch colony, and then in the mid-20th century, Buton was integrated into Indonesia, the Republic of Indonesia. So the Sultanate system was abolished finally in 1960. Then I'm going to talk about the social stratification, which is the main point of my presentation. The first division or group is called Kaum. This is the aristocracy group, and then it was the group which produced sultans. And then this group was in charge of administration. The unique thing in the social stratification of Buton lays in the existence of Walaka group. This is actually not aristocracy group, but I can say this is a kind of a semi-aristocracy group. Because when I interviewed to the Kaum people about the Walaka people say, we are only the aristocracy group, and the Walaka people are only workers for the kingdoms. But when I interviewed to Walaka people, they say, we are the aristocracy group. So there is a kind of an old perception of this kind of class system in Buton. And then this Walaka group, although it was not in charge of administration, they were in charge of some other important functions, including legislation and the election of sultan. So this is kind of different from many other cases in the world, where sultans were produced from the aristocracy group. But in Buton area, it was not the aristocracy group, but the other group called Walaka, which elected sultan. So sultans in Buton were not inherited through the bloodlines, but it was elected by the kind of a delegates of the people called Walaka. And the third group is called Papara, and it was the commoners. The first group was called Batua, which means slaves or bondsmen. This is a kind of different perception, but there are kind of strange perception of Kaum and Walaka existed in Buton, and then people say, Kaum is a grandson and Walaka is a grandfather. It's kind of very different from our common belief. The Kaum is the kind of highest class in society, should be regarded as the kind of elders of society. But it turns out that in Buton, the case is not that. So, Walaka group, and then especially among them there are 9 elders, they elected sultans. And then they always watched the deeds of the sultans. And then sometimes corrupt sultans were simply killed by this Walaka group. So, Walaka group, although it was not the administrator, was still wielded strong power in traditional society. And then the position of powerful position of Walaka came from their role as the controller of Ada. Ada means the customs, including customary law. So I can summarize the kind of relations between Kaum and Walaka like this. Although in perception or in theory, Kaum formed highest elite in society, but Walaka formed second highest elite group too, although it was not aristocratic group. And then power was divided almost equally between Kaum and Walaka. So, in theory, Kaum and Walaka should have balanced power in or over general matters about the kingdom. So this is the picture, and then the person in the center is the last sultan of Buton kingdom, and then all other people surrounding the sultan are the 9 elders. And then sultan was from Kaum, and then the other 9 people were from Walaka. So we can see the sultan looked a little bit sad because he's surrounded by this kind of scary looking guys, and then this one like having swords means that Walaka is watching the deeds of Sultan all the time. And then you can see the umbrella, the yellow umbrella, which is the sign of the kingship in Southeast Asia. And then you can see the two tassels hanging of the umbrella, and then this means that when the Sultan does some kind of wrong thing or corrupt thing, and then he can be hanged up with this kind of string or tassel. And then the relationship of Gaumu and Walaka always got through certain changes. And then the first change came with the advent of Islam, and then Islam functioned as a new knowledge system. So previously, before Islam came to Buton, it was only adat or the traditional customs, which was the knowledge system of Buton kingdom. So as I told you, it was the Walaka which controlled this knowledge system of adat, and then now with the advent of Islam and the new knowledge, this Gaumu group and Walaka group began to compete each other to dominate this new knowledge system in Buton. So in the 17th century, there was a strong sultan called La Elami, and then La Elami wrote a kind of a constitution of kingdom called Martabatuju. And then in the Martabatuju, some kind of changes in the relationship between Gaumu and Walaka were explained. First of all important positions in the government were given to Gaumu now. And then in the Gaumu, the Sultan divided into 3 families or 3 clans, and then 3 clans were assigned to produce Sultan or Prime Minister or Defense Minister in turn. And another change of the rule was that actually in previous times, Sultans were the elected being by the people or the Walaka group. But the La Elami made a rule that firstborn son can be automatically be the Sultan. So this is a clear violation of the traditional convention. So Walaka, the group of Walaka reacted strongly. So they threatened the Sultan that if La Elami insisted this rule, and they would leave the country. So this rule, new rule, was abandoned. And then overall, still, by this time, the power between Gaumu and Walaka group was evenly divided except for the brief period of La Elami. In the 19th century, the Dutch colonial rule began in the overall archipelago in Indonesia, and then changes in the power relation also resumed. In the Dutch colonial period, Sultan and this traditional social stratification persisted except for Batua. Batua means slaves or boatmen, because the first colonial policy done by the Dutch colonial government was to abandon slavery in Southeast Asia. So Batua is now gone, but Gaumu, Walaka, and the commoner people are still there. And then, in the 19th century, in overall world, kind of interesting change in terms of social stratification is a challenge by the commoner people. But no such thing happened in Buton because no challenges came from the commoner group, even in the 20th century or 21st century. And then there are many reasons, but first reason is that no Christian education in Buton because Buton was a strong Islamic area. And then also reformist Islamic movement, which actually brought out the nationalist ideas throughout the Indonesia, didn't land in Buton. So one of the exemplary group of reformist Islamic group called Humanities did not land in Buton. Perhaps because there was a too strong tradition of Sufism. As I said, the Butonese are still believing in reincarnation. And then also there were lack of educational chances. So if there were more educational chances, the Butonese were more kind of open to the education or nationalism or such new ideologies. But in Buton, lack of education made them be isolated from such ideas. But the second group, Walaka, being more open to the modernization and education. And perhaps because the Gaumu group did not want to send their children to modern schools, because this high-class Gaumu did not want to make their children be mixed or mingled with other commoners' children. So they want to isolate themselves and they remain as a kind of sacred beings in the society. And then the Dutch government abolished a lot of other positions, and then they installed new administrative positions, and then they actually misunderstood the concept of Colombo and Malacca. So when they made this kind of district or other kind of new administrative system, they had to put Colombo because Colombo had a function of administration. But to their eyes, Malacca also formed kind of elite group. So they also placed this Malacca group in the new administrative positions. So from that time, the Malacca began to become involved in the administrative position too. So in 20th century, early 20th century, the Dutch person recorded that there were 6 Malacca and 5 Colombo people in the administrative positions, which means that the role of Malacca remaining in the other position has also has changed now, and then they began to get involved in the administrative positions. And then this type of pattern was persisted until the Sukarno, the first president period in Indonesia. So Colombo and Malacca group dominated the local administration, and then still in this time period, Malacca also acted as the administrators in the local government. Then it was the early Suharto's period, which means that like the 1960s, mid-1960s and early 1970s, suddenly the Colombo and Malacca began to collapse all together. And then there was the first reason was related with the communist rising, revolt in Indonesia. So 1965 to 1969 was a kind of a horrible time for Indonesia in general because there was a communist, allegedly communist uprising in Indonesia, and the Suharto began to take governorship after subduing all these communist politics in southern part of Sulawesi. And another important reason was laid in the rivalry between Colombo and Malacca. Because in the communist tragedy in Buton, most of the victims were from Malacca group. Malacca group was, as I told you, they were the intelligentsia of the time. And then Colombo people didn't like the idea which Malacca could become an administrator. So one Colombo person told me like this: in the time of Buton Sultanate, in the long time ago, the Colombo, although they were not educated, they became lalaki. Lalaki means the king, Colombo and controller. Yet, in the Dutch colonial period, the Malacca began to be educated. Then this Colombo person told me that I see this incident where this communist tragedy as the realization of justice, as what our ancestors had predicted, which means that the Colombo people kind of try to dominate the local politics and then they didn't like the idea that Malacca became kind of a rival with them. So a lot of Butonese people told me that behind the scene of this communist strategy, it was the Colombo group which clandestinely informed Suharto's army that this Malacca group is all communist. That's why these communist Malacca people were accused in the communists and that they were punished by the Indonesian army. So it was what happened in Buton. And then after this communist uprising or communist tragedy in Buton, Colombo and Malacca lost all the privileges in society because in the local position, it was the Makassar people or Bugis people who became the administrator. So they became the heads of the district or some other sub-district areas. Thus, suddenly, in the 2000s, the Colombo and Malacca re-emerged in society as the new administrator in the local government. There are many reasons for sudden re-emergence of the traditional elite group. The first one is the 1999 regional autonomy being resumed in Indonesia. And then after this, when the regional autonomy was allowed, local governments everywhere in Indonesia were eager to present regional identities. In emphasizing regional identities, the most important memories were about the Sultan and Butonese kingdom, and then these kind of two items emerged as the symbol of the regional identities. Ada also revived. Sorry, So, Colombo and Malacca being the local elites, and then still the competition between Malacca and Colombo are going on. And then, so far there were some terms of mayor election or district head elections, and then no commoners ever emerged as a team for such election, and then only Colombo people and Malacca people made the team. And then the ideal teams for mayor or district head elections were the combination of Colombo and Malacca, because they know the people would like the idea of this combination of Colombo and Malacca. But emotional tension is still going on. So for the last 14 years, it was only Malacca people being the mayor of Baobao, which is the capital city of Buton now. So Colombo, when the Malacca became the mayor, Colombo person became the vice mayor because they made the team. But he was given no power at all. So this is the end of presentation, and then my presentation traces back how the traditional social stratification and then this aristocracy group and semi-aristocracy group, the perception has been sustained up to present time, and then how it influences in the local politics in contemporary period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please remain here because now the paper is open for discussion. The paper overall, according to me, deals with colonialism, post-colonialism and neo-colonial issues in one of the Asian countries, Bhutan.